Well, for the first keynote, let me present to you Chris Weiselbaum. He's co-founder and CTO of Vericodes. He is well known about Loft from Loft Heavy Industries. He was one of the researchers. And he was author of the book, The Art of Security Testing. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present the Perpetual Insecurity machine.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming to Hack in the Box and coming to hear me talk. This is my first Hack in the Box. It's actually my first time in Asia. I have to thank Dylan for inviting me and getting me to come and visit, and having a good time. So today I'm going to talk about sort of this way I view sort of the grand security problem that we all have. And it seems like we're always in a state of insecurity. We're always introducing new technology that has vulnerabilities, both new technology in corporate infrastructure and personal technology. It always seems to be introduced with design problems that lead to insecurities that last the whole lifetime of the technology. So I thought about a way to present this concept, and I work in a startup company, and I have to deal with analysts a lot. Analysts have a way of putting things into nice charts and nice formats. And Gartner has a concept called the hype cycle, where they have a chart, and actually here's their chart, where they talk about sort of the lifespan of a technology as it gets introduced into enterprises. So there's a technology trigger, that technology becomes available for people to buy, where the concept is just out there. And people hype it up, the people trying to sell it, hype it up, or the consultants who want to install it, hype it up. You can think of something like the cloud, right? The cloud's been around for a couple of years. It's in the hype phase right now, right? Everyone's thinking the cloud is going to solve all our problems. Availability, it's going to be cheap. We're going to have so much great functionality. And then, sort of after a year or so of the hype, this trough of disillusionment kicks in, and people start to think about all the problems it's going to have. How are we going to move everything to the cloud? What about security? And I'm just using cloud as an example. Any technology goes through this hype, disillusionment, and then this sort of imbalance sets in. They call that their slope of enlightenment. And eventually the technology gets mainstreamed, the kinks are kind of worked out, and they call that the plateau of productivity. So I said, what about looking at how vulnerabilities map along this curve of technology introduction and how the technology adopted over time? So I came up with what I call the hype cycle for vulnerabilities. And there's the technology trigger, that happens. And then there's researchers discover the technology. Typically this is like a year or two after the technology is out there. It's available. It's cheap enough for researchers to get their hands on it, or maybe they work at a company that just got the technology in, and they can get their hands on it and they start banging on it. And it seems to be about a year or two after the technology is introduced. And lo and behold, they find huge gaping problems a couple of years after it's been introduced. So it's being deployed at a pretty rapid pace. And so the researchers say, hey, I found this really horrible problem. Everyone should look out. This technology has a big problem in it. But then what happens is the businesses think the vulnerabilities are theoretical. Because it's really just one or two guys who are talking about it, or maybe a group of people. There's no attackers out there attacking them yet with the technology. So they say, well, this theoretical vulnerabilities. There's all these reasons why no one's going to do all those things. You're just trying to make a name for yourself. You're trying to say, I'm smarter than everybody. And I have to admit, at the Loft, we kind of did some of that. There was this quote in the mid-90s where Microsoft was talking about some buffer overflow, Internet Explorer, and people didn't really know how to write buffer overflows pretty efficiently for Windows yet. And Microsoft said this vulnerability is theoretical, because there wasn't any tool out there that even they could use to see the impact of it. So they said it was theoretical, and then so I came up with this tagline, Loft making the theoretical practical, since 1992, which is when we started. And we actually had this up sort of on the masthead of our website, if you're old enough to have visited back in the 90s. So I want to go through 4 different major classes of vulnerabilities that are really, endemic to the platform that is out there and widely deployed, and how this maps to this hype cycle. So maybe we can learn something from it. So it starts with Wi-Fi. 1999, Wi-Fi comes out. It's not broadly available yet. You have to have a PCMCIA card. They cost like $200. It's not built into the laptops. So it's a little bit expensive. But over the next year or two, researchers start to get their hands on it. And then in 2001, I went to a presentation at DEF CON 9, and I don't know if anyone recognizes that guy over there. But that's Peter Shipley. Quite a colorful character, but also really good security researcher. And Peter Shipley gave a presentation on war driving. Now, I think people were, they were finding networks, but what he did was he really kind of, came up with the whole process of, what's the software to use, what are the antennas to use. You use GPS, and you can, and you go around and cataloging where websites, where access points are. And then in the same year, 2001, Adi Shamir came out with the first crack of web. And it wasn't very efficient. It took a lot of CPU cycles. But it was pretty clear that web was fundamentally broken from this. So these are 2 things that are hitting the news in 2001. And what do businesses do? It's theoretical. Just use web. They say just use web, and they go on and they just keep deploying the technology. It's like they're not listening at all. It's like, don't you get it? People are going to drive around and find your access points, and then there will be other cracks in web, and you're going to be totally owned. This is the denial phase that businesses have, and really just not listening to people. So now, a couple more years have gone by. It's now 2002, and now it's really widespread. It's on the cover of it's on the front page of BBC's website, and tools like NetStumbler and Kismet and all these tools are starting to come out. And so this is this attack automation phase. Now everyone's doing it, right? And so that's going on over sort of the mid-90s, and but businesses are still just installing stuff and using web. And then what happens? This is actually dated 2007, but the attack actually happened in 2005. TJX in the US has thousands of stores. They're one of the largest clothing retail chains in the US. And they get owned. 6 years after the technology was first available, 4 years after researchers said, "Well, use this stuff, it's got problems." And obviously lots of places have gotten attacked. To some degree, web has been solved with WPA. But obviously there's all kinds of problems still with Wi-Fi. I don't turn Wi-Fi on when I'm at a security conference. People still have to know not to connect to that free public Wi-Fi SSID. The technology is just fundamentally is fundamentally broken, and it's still pretty much that way. It can be used in limited environments in a secure way, but in general, it has major problems. Now, I don't think there's any band-aids really applied for Wi-Fi that ever really happened, so that doesn't really apply to this. But today there's still problems with Wi-Fi. So let's go on to another technology platform: web applications and SQL injection.